Time now for our news review section. Russia says it supports the resumption of the implementation of the 2015 Iran nuclear deal in its original form. The Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says the only acceptable format of the deal is the one approved by the UN Security Council. Lavrov says Russia, like Iran, rejects any additions to or exemptions from the accord. Iran and the remaining signatories to the nuclear pact are set to resume a new round of talks before the end of November. Iran, however, has questioned the United States' seriousness to rejoin the multilateral agreements. Joining us is Tony Gosling, investigative journalist from the British city of Bristol, and also Lawrence Davison, a former lecturer at Westchester University from Westchester itself. Gentlemen, welcome. It's good to see you both. Tony, if I start with you, I mean, what do you make of Russia's comments or position here when you've got an agreement that's been approved and rubber stamped by the UN Security Council, and then the United States wants to change it? Trump tried to change it. Biden also wants to change it as well.
Well, yes, Donald Trump was pressurized into getting out of it by the Israelis, and this has really set the world on course for a potential conflagration in the Middle East. Now, I think it's fair to say that the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action was signed on the 14th of July 2015, was the Obama administration's attempt to stop the hawks who were trying to set East against West, to set Muslims against Zionists, and to set half of the world against the other. And I think since Trump pulled out of this deal, which I think is quite possibly the most important piece of paper on the planet, what we've seen what they call a hardening of the sides. So, before a conflict, in order to initiate war, what you have to do is you have to create two distinct separate sides. And that's why I think it's important that Russia, as at the time of the COP26 summit, which it's fascinating to see what's been going on here. Because a lot of people are asking me, why has Biden not gone to this massive summit where all the world leaders, apart from Russia and China and a few others on that other side, up in Glasgow? Well, the answer is, of course, if Biden was to turn up in Glasgow, you would see that this COP summit is actually a meeting of mostly the Western powers and the people that they've managed to get on board with their project for the Great Reset and all this sort of thing around the world. And it's got to be seen as something which is a fair thing up in Glasgow. So that's why Biden can't come. But anyway, getting back to the JCPOA, the Russians, and the reason I bring that in is because it's quite clear that the Russians are setting themselves separately, along with China, to the United States and the British, the Anglo-Zionist Empire's position. So there you go. I think that's, for me, that's pretty clear. That's what's going on here, is the Russians are sending a message. Very, very important message. Putin is not going to Glasgow, but what he's doing is he's standing shoulder to shoulder with Iran and saying, sign this agreement. This is the most important agreement in the world. Forget your climate talks for a minute and make sure that this agreement is reformed and re-signed. Otherwise, we could be heading down the road to war, never mind climate change.
Okay, and Lawrence, I've always been wanting to ask you this question, and think about it. Is this nuclear deal, it's just called the nuclear deal, the Iran nuclear deal, but has it got anything actually to do with Iran's nuclear program? Because every intelligence agency in the world has said that Iran's nuclear program is peaceful. Or is it more to do with, I mean, you've got Israel, the entity has hundreds of nuclear weapons, yet it's not even a member of the NPT?
It's got a lot to do with American politics at the present time. The Zionist lobby in the United States is an exceptionally well-organized and effective lobby. It's not the only one, but it is one of the more powerful ones, and can influence the position of politicians in this country, both on a federal and a local level. Biden himself, following the dictates of his mother, I guess, who told him never to forget the Israelis, is a heartfelt Zionist, and so he has taken this this personal position, and it's in congruence with the Zionist lobby. So politically, that's where he stands. Now, the position of the Israelis, of course, is that anything that will weaken the Iranians is a good thing and not a bad thing. And then any way of dividing the Western world, particularly the United States, from acceptance and peace with the Iranian Republic, it will essentially be in the interest of Israel. Essentially, what Biden is doing is sacrificing the interests of the United States and replacing it with the interests of Israel. And that attests to the power of the lobby within the context of how American politics has worked out in this country. Now, in terms of the Russians, I think that it's right. The Russians are declaring their position to be, shoulder to shoulder, as you said, with the Iranians. And so I think it's in Iran's interest to build an alliance of non-Western powers or other powers, anyone they can actually convince that their side is right, and to stand with a counter alliance, because they're going to get nothing from the Americans unless they're willing to essentially sacrifice, what they conceive to be their vital interests. And I agree with your other commentator that the Iran deal is essentially the most successful diplomatic achievement of the 20th century, and at least in my opinion. And so it's really a tragedy that for the sake of the Israeli interests, not only are they willing, the Americans willing to sacrifice Iran and the Iranian people, they're willing to sacrifice diplomacy instead of conflict, and they're willing to sacrifice international law.
Okay, Tony, just we've got 1 or 2 minutes left. Very quickly, do you agree? I mean, with the Zionist lobby in Washington, D.C., these pressuring the United States to maintain the sanctions on Iran, not for the sake of the nuclear, it's a peaceful nuclear weapons program because every intelligence agency on the planet has told us so, but to decline the power of Iran, to decline the strength of Iran.
Well, look, the Zionist lobby, just in the United States, it's very powerful in Britain too. Just in our city of Bristol, the Zionist lobby has been behind a woman who is a student who has actually penned articles supporting bestiality. She has led a campaign to get David Miller, the professor of sociology, sacked from Bristol University because he's been doing research on the media treatment of Islam and the bias against it in the UK press. And so it's a very powerful lobby here too. But you know what the Americans will say, and some of the British too, is that, well, Iran is a terrorist state, they support terrorism, and they say this all the time on the Western press without being challenged by these cowardly journalists we have nowadays. The fact of the matter is, of course, that the United States is a terrorist organisation and it is a terrorist state. It is taking the place, I think, of the 1930s Nazi Germany in excusing itself from invading any country it seems fit to at any time. So that's what we're really dealing with. And anybody in the British press and then the Western press and the Australian press and the WikiLeaks press that exposes what the United States are up to, it comes in for a very hard time. I mean, almost a crucifixion of Julian Assange is what we're seeing.
Yep.
So what you'll see is the whole of the Western press really has now become a massive propaganda machine against Iran, and so they think they can get away with it. Never mind the truth. They've got all that media to back them up, and they think they can get away with trying to keep this deal from being properly reinstituted. And if the world
I'm going to have to end it there, Tony. I'm afraid we have run out of time.
It needs that deal. I'll finish there.
Thank you very much. Let's thank our guests for their contribution and their thoughts. Tony Gosling, investigative journalist, joining us from Bristol, and Lawrence Davison, former lecturer at Westchester University, joining us out of Westchester. And that brings an end to this edition of the News Review.